Thank you, Mr. Vice President, distinguished delegates, colleagues, excellencies. As this may be the last time that I am reporting to the Human Rights Council in my capacity as UN Special Rapporteur on Toxics and Human Rights, I wish to start by thanking the Council for entrusting me with this appointment. I wish to thank member states that have welcomed me for official country visits and those that have contributed to and adopted recommendations in my thematic reports. I also wish to thank the numerous individuals and civil society organizations from around the world that have engaged with me and placed their trust and hopes in the Toxics and Human Rights mandate. I also wish to thank my wife, who is with me here today and whose support has made it possible for me to serve as Special Rapporteur over the last 5 years. Mr. Vice President, this year the Toxics mandate marks 30 years of existence. In 30 years, we have learned that global toxic pollution is part of the triple planetary crisis which threatens to make our planet uninhabitable for humans and accounts for widespread human rights infringements. Today we know about the proliferation of toxic sacrifice zones where disempowered communities are condemned to illness and death. We have also learned about grave injustices from the use of mercury in small-scale gold mining and the production for export of highly hazardous pesticides banned in their country of origin. Today we know of the global scourge of plastic pollution, shipbreaking, and electronic waste. We know about the enduring legacies of environmental discrimination and racism, and we know that impacts fall heaviest on indigenous peoples, children, and workers, among other groups in vulnerable situations. The growing global threat to human rights that is posed by exposure to hazardous chemicals and wastes underscores the importance of the Council's Special Procedures mandate on toxics and human rights. Mr. Vice President, for millions of people around the world, exposure to toxics means fear, anxiety and anguish, illness, disabilities, or a premature and painful death. However, in their struggle for justice and remedies, victims and their families often encounter heavy obstacles that result in delays and denial of rights. These barriers include inadequate laws, lack of information, limited legal standing, lack of legal assistance, inadequate statutes of limitation, disproportionate evidentiary burdens, prohibitive litigation costs, and lack of enforcement of judicial decisions. The obstacles entrench impunity, exacerbate environmental injustices, and undermine the preventive, restorative, and compensatory functions of legal systems. Thus, these obstacles aggravate the human rights violations resulting from toxic exposure. To overcome these obstacles, renewed efforts at international cooperation for global environmental justice are essential. In this regard, my thematic report on access to justice and effective remedies examines international human rights standards, assesses the obstacles that victims face in accessing justice and remedies, identifies innovative strategies and good practices, and puts forward a set of 24 guidelines for overcoming these obstacles. Guaranteeing effective remedies requires governments to consider the specific characteristics and challenges of toxics. First, latency periods, that is, the time between exposure to hazardous substances and the onset of clinical manifestation of disease may be in the order of years, decades, or generations. Second, proof of causation may be hard to establish with certainty. Third, scientific information on exposure to a chemical substance, including associated risks and hazards, may be non-existent, preliminary, or hard to access. Guaranteeing effective remedies in cases of toxic contamination also requires consideration of the characteristics of human rights obligations. Human rights treaties have established legally binding obligations for the benefit not of contracting parties, but of all individuals subject to their jurisdiction. Accordingly, these international obligations have an erga omnes nature, which requires that remedies not only protect victims, but serve to deter violations and uphold the legal order that the treaties create. Thus, comprehensive remedies in cases involving toxic harm will often extend beyond compensation and include cessation of releases of pollutants, non-repetition, cleanup of contaminated sites, respect for the inalienable right to truth, and the implementation of transitional justice mechanisms. Mr. Vice President, international human rights instruments at the global and regional levels establish obligations and standards on access to justice and effective remedies. They establish that an effective remedy must be adequate, accessible, timely, and enforceable. However, these obligations and standards are too often honored in the breach, leaving countless individuals and communities impacted by toxic exposure without a remedy. Barriers in access to justice and effective remedies create conditions in which harmful practices are normalized and polluters evade accountability. For example, in many jurisdictions, legal frameworks are ill-equipped to prevent toxic exposures, force polluters to pay, or remedy toxic harm, where national standards on environmental quality, emissions, and management of hazardous substances and waste are inadequate. The result is legalized poisoning of people and their inability to obtain remedies through legal avenues. Similarly, restrictive legal standing laws often allow access only to individual victims of toxic exposure. Such laws fail to recognize the collective and latent nature of harm in many toxic cases, where contamination may affect entire ecosystems and populations over very long periods of time. At the same time, governments are testing innovative strategies to overcome the barriers that impede access to justice in cases of toxic contamination. Broadened standing, dynamic burden of proof, collective actions, accessible legal and technical assistance, cross-border litigation, specialized courts, and comprehensive remedies demonstrate that tools do exist to improve access to justice in toxic cases. To conclude, Mr. Vice President, lack of accountability is aggravating the increasing toxification of our planet and the resulting infringements of human rights for countless individuals and groups around the globe. The 24 guidelines on access to justice and effective remedies that I present today articulate ways in which states can overcome the obstacles that entrench impunity in cases of toxic contamination and secure environmental justice for all. Mr. Vice President, now I wish to say a few words about my visits to the Dominican Republic and Samoa. Comenzando con la República Dominicana, quisiera agradecer al gobierno por su invitación y su cooperación. En la República Dominicana, el acceso a la información, la participación pública y el acceso a la justicia se reconocen cada vez más como principios fundamentales de una gobernanza ambiental basada en los derechos humanos. Felicito al gobierno por sus notables avances en el fortalecimiento de los marcos legislativos e institucionales en la materia, y lo aliento a presentar nuevamente el Acuerdo de Escazú sobre derechos ambientales al Tribunal Constitucional con vistas a la ratificación del mismo. Al mismo tiempo, quisiera expresar mi preocupación por la calidad del aire y del agua, la extendida contaminación por plásticos, la afectación de escuelas por el uso de plaguicidas peligrosos, los graves riesgos relacionados con la presa de cola El Naranjo, propuesta por la mina de oro Pueblo Viejo, así como las alegaciones de corrupción en la construcción de la central termoeléctrica Punta Catalina y sus impactos ambientales. Durante mi visita fui testigo de un impulso creciente para hacer frente a los desechos y a la contaminación por sustancias peligrosas, incluidas sus causas y repercusiones. Por ejemplo, las inversiones para transformar vertederos en rellenos sanitarios y mejorar su gestión le permitirán al país abordar la actual emergencia que enfrenta en el manejo de residuos. Aliento a la República Dominicana a aprovechar las oportunidades que brinda este momento y a aplicar su visión y compromiso con los derechos ambientales para fortalecer la gestión y eliminación ambientalmente racionales de las sustancias y los desechos peligrosos. On the independent state of Samoa, I would like to thank the state authorities for their support during this visit and their openness to dialogue. Samoa, like other small island developing states, faces disproportionate environmental challenges despite contributing minimally to global pollution. The arrival of low-quality plastic products leads to an ecological catastrophe in a place where plastic pollution cannot be processed and contained. While some actions can be taken at the national level, the importance of international cooperation and environmental agreements cannot be overstated for the protection of the people and the environment in Samoa. The country is also at the receiving end of imports of pesticides that are banned in other countries and used cars and tires. The country faces a pressing need for effective waste recovery and recycling programs. While the introduction of a waste levy on items like PET bottles and aluminum cans is a positive step, broader implementation and enforcement are necessary. To improve the situation, I recommend that the government recognize the right to a healthy environment in its constitution. I believe Samoa's traditional practices, knowledge, and community resilience offer a solid foundation for sustainable solutions. I will finish by commending Samoa's leadership in international environmental issues, hosting the Secretariat of the Pacific Regional Environment Program, chairing the Alliance of Small Island States, and its advocacy for a strong treaty on plastic pollution. I hope that these efforts will continue and amplify. Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President.